Within the world of magic tricks and learning, there are typically two camps. Those who emphasize sleight of hand above all else. They insist that the magic community is a meritocracy, that anyone can learn sleights from the archives, earning their way to respect and admiration from their peers. And on the other side, those who emphasize subtlety, insisting that it's just as good as sleight of hand. They preach the gospel of simplicity, proclaiming that if you don't have to devote all of your energy to sleight of hand, then you can focus on presentation. Both sides have their pros and cons, with pitfalls that their supporters might overlook. In this episode of Erudite Magic, we're going to examine who's right, and what are the merits and examples from both sides within the magic literature. Throughout this episode, I'd like to hear from you. If you have a thought, drop it down in the comments below, because I think this needs to be a bigger conversation. And if you want to know where I stand on the subject, stay tuned to find out. I think the way to properly frame this discussion is as a spectrum. And like most spectrums, neither one is inherently right or wrong, but they are different. Let's give an example so that we kind of know what we're talking about here. Let's take forcing a card. On the sleight of hand end of the spectrum, we have the classic force. This force relies very much on the physical, although there definitely are psychological aspects to it as well. Ultimately, though, the performer needs to be able to control a card within the pack and force it into the participant's hands at the correct time. This requires constant practice to ensure that your hands can do what you need them to do when you're under fire. And as an example of the other side, more focused on subtlety, you have the venerable crisscross force. In this case, the performer doesn't really even have to touch the deck if they can give good instructions. It relies completely on the participant believing that they were able to cut the cards anywhere they wanted to arrive at a free selection. And of course, this is a somewhat silly and obvious example, but on each end of the spectrum, and primarily focused around card magic, you might expect to see in the sleight of hand camp people advocating for learning things like the diagonal palm shift, second dealing, or on the coin side of things, potentially palming multiple coins while simultaneously allowing your hands to look natural and empty. And for subtleties, you're likely to find things like gimmicks, discrepancies, and some deceptive procedures that may even fool the practitioner. And I thought it would be worthwhile to discuss the pros and cons of each side of this spectrum and look into some of the resources that lean heavily into each approach. In the sleight camp, the pros are many. Once you learn sleight of hand, it's with you, it's ready to go. You're always ready with some cards or coins or whatever it is that you perform with. You're ready to perform miracles because you've trained your body and specifically probably your hands to do your bidding and perform these secret maneuvers in a natural way. And of course, along the path, you have taught yourself that you're capable of doing things that you didn't even know that you could do. But not only do you get this personal satisfaction, you're also earning your place in the magic world by demonstrating your commitment to the craft. It's not all sunshine and roses in the sleight camp. On the con side of things, you have to put in more work to master it. There's no two ways about it. If you're going to learn some of the more complicated sleights and continue to elevate your craft, this is probably going to take hours and hours of focused work. And let's be honest, sleights are not always surefire under pressure. Now, the more reps you get in actual performance conditions, obviously your nerves will improve and the adrenaline that makes your body shake in that fight or flight response gradually start to ease and fade away. And finally, you could just be fooling yourself. We've all seen someone who performs their invisible pass, but they must be blinking at a time that you're not. As far as the resources to look at for mastering sleight of hand, for card work, you start with the basics. Something like a card college. You could start less expensively with something like Royal Road to Card Magic, but I think most people recognize card college is the definitive work on learning sleight of hand with cards, at least as far as magic books are concerned. And for coins, Bobo's New Modern Coin Magic is always a good choice. Take it as far as you feel comfortable within each of these texts and keep challenging yourself. This path will lead you to other authors, creators, and a community who loves sleights, and that's a great thing. Eventually, you'll find yourself learning tricks from books like Guy Hollingworth's Drawing Room Deceptions. On the other hand, magic also has room for people who prefer subtlety to knuckle-busting sleights. After all, subtleties are often simple to learn, use, and remember, and they can fool the sharpest minds of those who aren't familiar with the principle at work. One of the best parts is you don't need a lot of skill to pull off a true miracle. But On the flip side of that, if you're not careful, it can very quickly devolve into a tedious mathematical procedure that does not fool or even entertain anyone. Plus, it could lead to a reliance on other things to the point where someone asks you if you could perform and you say, well, I don't have anything with me, because you're missing that gimmick or stack. And potentially the subtlety could be easily recognized if your participant knows what to look for. Not only that, you probably won't win any brownie points within the magic community. And like the Sleight Camp, you might just be fooling yourself thinking that this is entertaining. For resources within this subtlety camp, if you're into cards, Nick Trost has a number of books that don't rely on heavy sleight of hand. Many of the procedures do the work for you, and the trick may either work itself out or require some more self-working sleights like the crisscross force. Steve Beam comes to mind, as does John Bannon, for tricks that sometimes don't require a lot of work to be a great trick. Stuart James also thoroughly pursued the idea of tricks that almost work themselves, so if you're interested in subtlety over sleights, you may want to check out some of these authors. Here's where things get interesting though. Many times people will pursue one camp over the other because they either want to stay comfortable and don't want to be challenged, or they just like to try difficult things. But the best way to be, as with any spectrum, is probably somewhere near the middle. There's obviously nothing wrong with pursuing hardcore sleight of hand or learning all of these subtleties, but don't do it to the exclusion of other methods of learning magic. Keep what serves you. You're going to want to learn some of those basic sleights. Start with Bobo, start with Royal Road to Card Magic. Make sure that you know at least some of the basics and you're challenging yourself to be able to handle props in a way that looks like you're a trained professional. But if you're in that sleight camp, also recognize that the odd gimmick, discrepancy, or even mathematical procedure may also serve you. When you look around at the professionals and watch a show, many times they're not performing things that are technically difficult, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the chops to do it. Putting in the work behind the scenes on things that you may never perform can still lead to greater heights. And obviously having a knowledge of many mathematical procedures, stacks, gimmicks will also benefit your magical performances. At the end of the day, you have to make up your mind about what kind of performer you want to be. You can't let anyone else make that decision for you or even cave into peer pressure. Understand your limitations and constraints, but don't be afraid to push yourself. I think we'll all be surprised what we can accomplish with just a little bit of work. And no matter what, let's show kindness to each other, because magic is such a wonderful community, so welcoming of all different skill levels and all different pursuits. There's so much that we can all learn from each other to support more entertaining outcomes for our participants and audiences. Sound off down below with where you fall into this spectrum, what you're working on, and maybe some of the resources that you think others could benefit from to learn either sleights or subtleties. As always, my friends, I appreciate you watching. And until next time, keep reading.